Hello everyone, let's do a shallow dive into Svema Astrum FN-64. This video discusses what we're going to call Astrum 64 for brevity, which is an 80 ISO film. We're going to look at how to use it, the film's characteristics, some limited technical details, and limited sample images. Astrum 64 is a slow film available in 35mm factory spools. Now, it is an 80 ISO film, even though it's called FN-64. And by the way, those 35mm factory spools, fun fact, are trimmed and sized for Leica Barnack rangefinder cameras in terms of their leader shape. Also, sometimes it appears that FN-64 or Astrum 64 is available in 120, which I only learned when writing this script on accident. I'm not going to lie, I would love to shoot this film in 120. I think it would be absolutely beautiful in that format. One quick note on this film, Astrum makes this stock based on the vintage formulations of Russian Svema films. And this stock looks, well, the images from it look and feel vintage. And it's a look you're either going to love or hate. I don't really see too much room for being anywhere other than on the ends of the spectrum with, your feelings on this film's images. First up, this film comes with a leader that is trimmed for Leica rangefinder cameras, and it is, to the best of my knowledge, the only film on the market that has that leader style. So Leica users can rejoice in that. Secondly, the plastic film cassettes that this comes in are easily disassembled by twisting off the top of the cassette, and then you can reuse that cassette if you would like to, and that means you don't have to pitch them. One major frustration about the cassettes that are used for Astrum 64, not all cameras, like the short spool, the center spool that the film is actually wound on, has a height that is shorter than standard. So my Nikon F3, Canon F1, and some other manual advanced camera bodies required that the film be given slack by turning the rewind knob in the opposite direction of the arrow prior to advancing the film in order to protect the advanced mechanism from damage. And that's because the shorter spools in these can cause the overall cassette to rest in an improper alignment within the camera that can cause the film not to feed out of the cassette smoothly. So my point and shoot cameras that I tried this with which have advanced motors, none of them could even advance this film. That's also true of Astrum 200, and that's the point here is that if you feel that when you're using this film, that advancing your film's advanced mechanism is a bit rough, don't damage your camera, don't risk it, don't make your camera work extra hard. Loosen the film before advancing and see if that solves the problem. To the above point, not all of the rolls I used on this stock had that same issue, even in the same cameras, which was really weird. So there may also have been some sort of production variance that caused some of the rolls not to sit correctly in the cameras. It could also have had to do with the film emulsion, because I noticed some of the film emulsions had different base thicknesses, and there did seem to be a correlation between the films that I had that had a significantly thinner base being harder to advance, and the stocks that I used of Astrum 64 that had a normal base thickness being easier to advance. Of note, I bought 10 rolls of this film for this video, and I bought them all at the same time. So I was very perplexed as I used this film why some of them had a perceptibly thin base layer, and some of them had a standard thickness base layer. Next up, Astrum does not have a large diversity of developer data available, so I only used 7 developer dilution combinations with 5 chemistries total for this whole video. So here are some notes on how they performed. XTOL stock delivered dark shadows with excellent negative density. XTOL 1+1 had very good shadow retention, decent highlight detail, but slightly low contrast images. HC 110 at Dilution B, which is 1+31, yielded no grain, a dramatic contrast profile, and absolutely stunning image detail. Rodinal at 1+50 was one of the best results I've seen from Rodinal, which is not always a house favorite developer. It's very hit and miss. Paranol S at 1+50 performs like Rodinal, of course, but it gave a slightly smoother image look, so I'm not sure if that had to do with the age of the actual chemical or some chemistry variation in the Paranol versus the Rodinal formulation. Just an observation. D76 stock gave negatives that were on the thin side, had 0 shadow retention, and it's not a stock I would ever use again for this film. D76 at 1+3 performed like D76 stock, but with better overall tonal gradation, but it's still a combination I would skip with Astrum 64 in the future. One key note on Astrum 64, it is not suitable for push exposure, and though I shot 10 rolls of this, only 7 returned images I could use for this video because 3 that I shot at 100 ISO, even with development compensation, were so unusably thin that I could not recover a suitable image from them. Astrum 64 is more tolerant of overexposure and standard developing as a combination, and I found that when I gave this film an extra third of a stop of light, it responded very well to that. So that basically means shooting this at 64 ISO rather than 80 ISO, and I really liked this film's performance there. Grain is apparent in image areas with smooth tones and textures, such as skies, and invisible in images with any kind of detail. When present, grain adds a lovely image character. Tonality and tonal range are developer dependent, but I would rank this film's exposure latitude as narrow by modern black and white film standards, and that gives Astrum 64 a look that is vintage in many very good ways. Acutance is sharp, and the transitions from dark to light are crisp and well defined. Contrast is strong by the standards of some modern black and white films because shadows are clipped quite readily. This is because Astrum 64 appears to take a long time to record shadow data relative to the rest of the tonal range. With an image we would likely consider a proper exposure, the shadows are often not recorded. This, from a technical standpoint, has to do with the toe position of shadow recording in the exposure curve. It's actually something I don't really talk about in these videos anymore, but suffice to say, what I'm saying here is that the film's emulsion seems to take longer to start recording than other films do. And basically, in a nutshell, film emulsions need a certain number of photons, for lack of a better phrase, to convert a film crystal clump, which is what we call grain, into a crystal clump that will be dark on the negative. Okay? So films that have a low need for light will flip a crystal clump to dark relatively quickly in the exposure, and that will allow them to record shadow details. Astrum 64 is not one of those films, and the apparent difference in time needed to record shadows versus highlights means that shooting for shadows will destroy your highlights. Shooting for highlights will leave you with no shadows, and also your midtones skewing toward the dark side. So for those of you who like dark shadows, this film could likely deliver pretty well. Sharpness is good with fine details being recorded readily. Digital conversion was easy, and this film's image character was retained well on the digital files. Astrum FN-64 35mm film hails from the mid-1900s Russian Svema film emulsion formulations. The film provides a look and feel highly reminiscent of that era and geography, and the image character it delivers would be as at-home photographing a family vacation as it would be documenting the remains of Soviet-era brutalist architecture. When Russia increased the scope and scale of their war on Ukraine in 2022, I picked up 10 rolls of each of the 2 Astrum stocks I could get for this video, and the 200 ISO stock video will appear later this year. As the Ukrainian people have proven to be resilient, so too has Astrum shown itself to hold up well. Astrum films are a unique offering in the film space, and their image look is unlike anything else on the market. Right now, however, I've been unable to find out if the factory or business still exists. At minimum, in the US, I've not found anyone selling it, and the Lomo film made in partnership with Astrum Ukraine in 2023 is no longer available either. It is my sincere hope that Astrum survives, and that in some years, when this war in Ukraine has resolved, that Astrum can return to operation. In the meantime, my hope is that this and the forthcoming Astrum 200 video will help shine a light on this film, and if it is still around, encourage photographers to look for it with a keen eye to embrace the unique look Svema Astrum FN-64 provides.